Hello, I'm Lynley Crosswell, CEO of Museums Victoria. One of the most important roles that museums can play is promoting informed, evidence-based scientific discussion that helps us all to better understand what's happening in the world around us. Right now, the entire team here is looking forward to the day we can reopen our museums and welcome visitors through our doors. Two big challenges are facing us, of course. How do we get to a COVID normal world? And what do we want that world to look and to feel like? We've asked an esteemed panel of leaders and experts in their fields to consider those very questions. From the diverse perspectives of ethics, business, epidemiology, and civic leadership, our panel explores how the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged our sense of who we are as individuals and as a society, and our path forward together. It's a fascinating conversation.
Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
I want to begin before I get underway with my own acknowledgement of the traditional owners. I'm joining on Wurundjeri land today, but I'm conscious that people joining this conversation are scattered right across Victoria and more further than that. So I just want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging from all the lands we're joining this conversation today. Lord Mayor Sally Capp, I might come to you first if I can. You've been an absolute champion of enabling better access and equity when it comes to not only the vaccine supply, but also the environments where vaccines are actually administered. Why for you is this so critical when we talk about the current challenge, but also the journey and pathway out?
Thanks, Holly. Hello, I'm joining you from the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and I add my acknowledgement and respects to elders past and present. We very much feel the shared responsibility that is around managing this virus and providing that pathway out of lockdowns. And as part of that shared responsibility, and it's an acknowledgement that particularly as a local government, the level of government most closely connected to community, that we have a focus on those who are the most vulnerable in our community. We know that you can't opt out of the virus, and we can't opt out of doing our best to ensure that everybody has equitable access to the vaccine. That's one of the reasons why, for example, we've had a communications campaign in multilingual languages so that we can reach as many people as possible. We have the second most diverse municipality in Victoria, and we know many other local governments have been doing the same. All of these efforts make sure that everybody, literally everybody in our community is aware of the need to vaccinate and also has the ability to be vaccinated so that we can together work our way towards getting ourselves out of lockdown and a healthier, safer future for all.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your leadership and for your efforts there. And Matt Gudinski, I wanted to come to you because the Lord Mayor and her response there touched on the importance of reaching everyone. And, you know, one of the things that I found quite extraordinary in the press release sort of regarding your Vax the Nation campaign was that 2/3 of the live music industry jobs, about 79,000 jobs, have disappeared by the end of 2020. You launched this campaign along with colleagues across the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about what you hope the campaign will achieve, but also how you've positioned it in order to, I guess, further that idea of trying to reach everyone?
Well, thanks, Holly. I think, like you said, it goes without saying the music and arts industry is one of the hardest hit industries via the pandemic. And I think it's very hard to put a figure on how much work and how many jobs have been lost, but this figure you just mentioned is significant. So as soon as vaccination became freely available to the community, myself and other industry leaders really felt the need to harness the audience and the power of message that we have with our network and our connection to the community through music to ensure that the right message was going out there. It's become pretty apparent on a global scale, but also in Australia, that for the arts industry and the music industry, the only way out of this is vaccination. So the Vax the Nation campaign was launched with, as was said earlier, over 400 other supporting companies within the industry to really harness the powerful social media and databases that we had to get the message out there to not only the community to vaccinate, but also to the government, the federal government leaders, about the significance and the importance of our industry and the reach that our industry has. The industry has been overlooked in many ways for significant support during this period, and has been an ongoing challenge for all aspects and all parts of especially the music industry.
Absolutely. Now, Professor Maskell, I might come to you next if I can. You've got such an interesting set of vantage points and experience when it comes to this conversation, both as a Vice-Chancellor of a university who made a very significant announcement today, but also in your background in immunology and vaccination and the like. And I wanted to touch on your comment when we were having a conversation last week that this is as much of a social science problem as it is a medical one. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, I think you've just heard from Sally and Matt precisely why it's a social science problem, actually. Viruses come along and they will be more or less virulent. The science is essential to identify the new virus and to try to work out how nasty it's going to be. But immediately you're faced with a particular set of problems. So in the old days, before modern medicine, this virus would have come along. It would have killed a lot of people. We'd have got over it in about 6 months, and then we'd get on with our lives. But these days we have modern medicine. It's completely immoral to consider letting it go through and kill everybody. So we have to then immediately get to a position where we effectively decide what's the right level of morbidity and mortality for society. And then we do that for all sorts of diseases and conditions. And that's a really hard problem. It's a hard problem of ethics and philosophy and everything else. There'll be some people that say 0 deaths is the right answer. There'll be some people that say quite a few is fine, especially if they're old people. Neither of those is the right answer as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not quite sure how to work that one out. So we immediately need philosophers and ethicists like the other Matt on the call today to help us to understand those problems. And then you start getting into what do governments do about this? This pandemic has been a challenge for all leaders around the world, no matter what political persuasion they happen to be. They've never had to deal with this before. They're making it up as they go along quite often, and they're trying to rely on the best evidence. So that is a fascinating thing to be studied later on when this is all over, the history of this, the social science of this, the politics of this, how does it pan out? And my sympathy is with our leaders. I don't agree with every decision that all of them have made, both state and federal, but that's fine. That's why we live in a democracy, to disagree. But in general, I'm very sympathetic to what they've done, and I'm very sympathetic to how they've handled this. But there's a whole load of stuff which emerges from the way that they've responded to the pandemic that we now have to deal with. And so what are the settings for society as we begin to come out of this? When is the right moment when will be the right moment to stop testing for COVID virus? We can't test for this forever. We don't do that for all of the other bugs that I've worked on in my career, and yet they're still out there and they're still killing people. So that's another problem there. I just wanted to touch also on the arts, not just the social sciences. So in social sciences, we're talking about ethics, we're talking about philosophy, we're talking about law, we're talking about economics, we're talking about politics, we're talking about sociology, the whole thing, history, who's going to write the history of this period? But the arts have been so important as well. And listening to Matt, number one, on the list today about music, I was a semi-pro musician a long time ago, and I've been doing some videos I've stopped doing it now, but during the early days of the lockdown, I would put a video, just a social video out to the staff at the university on a Friday afternoon. And towards the end of that, I decided at the end, I'd talk about some music that I liked, and I've got a very eclectic love of music. And I tell you what, most of the comments that came back to me, and there were quite a few used to come back to me, they focused on the music, saying how great it was to hear that and how they made a memory for them of a good time they had with that particular song or whatever it was. And that just immediately made me think that so many people are relying on the arts and on music and those things to get through this. And that says something about how fundamental the arts are to human happiness and well-being.
Now, Matt Beard, I want to come to you in a second, but Matt Gudinski, I was watching you lean in when Duncan was talking there about the role that the arts plays in connection, and particularly music. Did you want to comment? As Duncan said, so many great memories and such a key framework of our city is formed around music and the arts. And we're really hoping to use our industry to really help get Melbourne back to the city that it was prior to the pandemic when we move on from this. So it's great to hear Duncan comment about the importance of that and getting back to what is a thriving Melbourne. Hear to the return of the thriving Melbourne that we all know and love. Matt Beard, I want to come to you because Duncan set you up perfectly there with the discussion around ethics in this conversation, the value of human life. And I'd also love to ask you, not only for your response to what you've heard already, but you're very big on the focus we need to have on the common good in this conversation and the way we move forward. And I'd love for you to explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I think Duncan has set me up really well, and also set me up with an impossible philosophical problem to solve. That there is no magic solution to this, but I have noticed, I think, of the trajectory of the pandemic from early stages in lockdown 1 through to subsequent lockdowns, that we have gone from a sense of all being in this together, that, I'll wash my hands and you wash yours, like we'll all take care of our grandparents, like this shared sense of sacrifice, to a position that has become much more antagonistic, where we feel like some people are benefiting and some people are being left behind, and where this has become very divisive. And I think one of the reasons for that has been that we have, for a really long time, focused on the way that we think about ourselves and understand ourselves in relation to other people and to society being individualistic. Like, I am me and I have full sovereignty over myself, and you must not violate that unless there is some benefit for me. I think what we learned really on in the pandemic is, like, we are all enormously vulnerable to the choices of other people, and we're enormously dependent on the people around us. But that hasn't really translated into our kind of moral logic. And so we started to think about, making trade-offs, who benefits, whose lives are more important, instead of kind of holding on to an idea that I think is pretty intuitive when we talk about thriving, which is that we can't purchase our thriving if the cost is someone else's suffering. And that's the basic idea behind the common good, that we don't think about what is going to be the best outcome in terms of economics, or overall, the most people are going to be happy if we do X, Y, and Z, but it's going to mean that we sacrifice a few more people. But then we think about how we can do this in a way that leaves nobody behind and generates the same opportunities, and even creates potentially a more equitable society than we had. We've seen really clear examples of this just recently. Recommendations from the Disability Royal Commission that recently came out just said their recommendation was not to reopen as soon as we hit 70%, but to reopen when we hit 70%, when we feel confident that all vulnerable people with disabilities, including intellectual disabilities, have had demonstrable access and informed access to the vaccine, and that all of their support workers are vaccinated. And that's an example where we might say, well, there is a really fast route from A to B, or there is a route that takes a little bit longer, but brings a few more people along with us. And it changes our own logic as well, from a logic of resentment about what we're having to sacrifice, to an idea about, well, we're actually sacrificing for this, and I'm proud to do this, and I'm grateful to do this because I identify as part of this community who deserves my care, and all of these people who deserve my care. And so my question looking forward is to look back and say, what was going on before this pandemic hit that meant that we're not in that mindset? That meant that this has been so hard for us to hold? Like, why did we lose our patients so fast? That's the question that I'm wrestling with.
It's a big question to be wrestling with. And one of the things that strikes me, Sally, if I can come to you, about the different demands that this period has created on leaders and the different requirements we need of leaders moving forward. I'd be interested in your observations as a leader of a city and more generally engaged in the public policy setting, interacting with a lot of leaders through this pandemic. What do you think we need more of from leaders in this period? And what has it shown up in leadership? Perhaps, I guess some areas that we might desire a little more capability around too.
Yeah. Wow, well, that's an enormous question, Holly. So thank you. And to build on the themes as we go along, that sense of thriving also only happens as an all-in, because we know, as we look at the fragments of our economy at the moment, at the fragments of how we pull people together as a community, it really only works if everybody rises at the same time. This is not an era in which we're going to be picking and choosing retail over hospitality or one part of our community over another, because we're so interdependent to making Melbourne the special place that it is. We really need to make sure that we bring people along. So the same challenges we have about bringing everybody along on vaccination are absolutely true for how we bring everybody along on rebuilding a thriving Melbourne. Certainly, so many aspects of leadership have been tested at this time. As has been said, there really isn't a complete rule book for this situation. So we've had to do a lot of things really on the run and in crisis mode and in the urgent and immediacy that the pandemic has created across our community. And that really has meant that leaders have had to respond in different ways. If I can put it in the context also of our organisation, for example, as a level of government, we've had to be more flexible than ever. There are services and issues that we've had to manage that we've never had to do before, particularly around public health, for example. What does it mean for our own open spaces? What does it mean for our community infrastructure like libraries and rec centres? What is our role? And then internally as well, as we've closed down some of those functions, the flexibility of our workforce to remain focused and committed and frankly employed has meant that we've redeployed resources into new programs like our Business Concierge program, which is an outreach program for our small business owners that we've never had before, but it's been so good that we are going to keep it going post-COVID in terms of support and interaction into a very important part of our community. So I think there's been that sense of, I say flexibility, it's adaptability, but it's also the willingness to take risks. When we first floated the idea of outdoor dining after lockdown 2, so in bounce back 2, as I like to call it, and we said, let's take indoors outside, which we're planning again in bounce back 6. Even a lot of hospitality owners said, we're not an outdoor city, we don't do outdoor dining, but in the context of that being the only option for businesses to be able to serve patrons, we gave it a red hot go in record time, and it's been a resounding success. There are things that we've tried that haven't worked so well, but if some of the silver linings from what Homer Simpson, the great oracle, calls a crisis-opportunity, is that we learn to be more open to risk, exploration, experimentation, and we allow leaders and organisations, particularly government, to have the room to try new things. I think we will be able to respond and evolve more quickly and better than we've ever done before. And that's really been a key learning for me from this crisis.
Duncan, I'm intrigued for your standpoint with the decision that Melbourne University made recently. There's a lot of leaders that are wrestling with a similar decision. How do we navigate, whether it's return to work, whether it's opening our business fully again, whether it's, live events coming back as Matt's working through. Can you talk us through the process you work through to the degree that you can, and just the decision-making process to arrive at the position that Melbourne University has?
We have been discussing vaccination and requirement for vaccination for a long time at the university. Also, the Victorian Vice-Chancellor's Committee, which I chair, has been discussing this issue for quite some time too. I think one thing I'd like to start out by saying is that a decision had to be made about this. Just inaction is a decision in itself. So, you're effectively, I'm glad to see Matt nodding there, that bit of cod philosophy that I learned a long time ago, but if we'd have chosen not to say anything about this, then that would have been a decision actually. And that would have been a decision to put up with a less safe workplace than the one we might have. Faced with that decision, effectively boiling it down into that binary, I think we had little choice but to go for a requirement for people to come on, if they wanted to come onto campus, a requirement for them to be vaccinated. that's going to be a lot of people are going to be have been very happy with that already in feedback, and some have been very unhappy with that. Some have been so unhappy that they've accused me of breaking the law, that I'll, burn in hell and all the other things that some people like to say about those kinds of decisions. Well, I'm sorry about that, and I am sorry that they're feeling upset about that decision, actually, but I'm convinced that it's the right decision, at least for now, and we'll see how things move over the next few months, year, whatever. But I'm very comfortable that it was a decision that we almost had to make. I think that it is going to be supported by the government, both state and federal, actually. I mean, the state government has already mandated vaccination for going back to school. Universities, whilst different from schools, are not particularly different in those terms. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with the decision that we took there.
I want to talk about another, I guess, controversial part of this whole conversation, which is anti-vax, movements and protests around the place, and your nuance in the conversation from an ethicist standpoint around, vaccine hesitancy versus anti-vax, and probably the nuance we need to appreciate there, and the way that we need to be thinking through that challenge. Can you talk to us about that?
I mean, there are no hard lines here, right? Like in this desire to get everyone vaccinated very quickly. And let's be clear about this. There is a moral imperative to be vaccinated quickly because there are lives at stake. There is people's mental well-being at stake. Like there is a lot at stake in terms of time. Like delay, like Duncan said, delay is a decision and indecision has consequences. So there is genuinely an imperative here. But I think there have been some challenges that are more deeply underlying issues in terms of the way that we try to engage with people who disagree with us, which have been brought to a head around vaccination and vaccine hesitancy. And that has been, I think, in part that everyone has taken it on themselves to be the champion of vaccination. And that goes from everyone who has a Twitter account onward. That's been problematic for a couple of reasons. The first is that we know from research and evidence that if you try to persuade someone and are unsuccessful, they become more wedded to the beliefs that they held before. So if you've got someone who's vaccine hesitant and you are not entirely across everything that you need to know about vaccination to persuade someone, you are going to make that person more likely to be committed to a vaccine hesitant or an anti-vaxxer kind of perspective on things. The second thing is that I think because we haven't had that mindset around taking everyone with us and around recognizing that there are people who might have legitimately suffered or made sacrifices, even if they were the right decisions for us to make overall, because they haven't been validated and attended to by some kinds of leaders, they've had a lot of resentment that has had nowhere to go. And then there have been groups who have been able to prey on that, have been able to prey on that experience of negativity. And so people who have very, very different reasons for feeling negatively about lockdowns, for example, or the consequences that's had on their business, the one person who has been able to tell them a story about that, the one person who has been able to sit with them and kind of validate that negativity has been a group that is spouting misinformation. And I think that's been an enormous challenge as well. And the third piece of this is just an unsolved problem, which is just the ripeness of misinformation and the ongoing challenge of trust in institutions. And those two things have just been, like everything in a crisis, brought to a head. You know someone who someone really is in a moment of crisis, and you know a society for what it really is in a moment of crisis. And I think these issues that we've been talking about within kind of politics and ethics for quite a long time have just come to a really clear head here around vaccination, because there are people who are vulnerable to misinformation in the same way as we can be vulnerable to a virus.
It's such a very clear through line in this conversation around bringing everyone along and the effort that needs to be made in particular to reach vulnerable groups and communities. And Matt, I want to come to you with an audience question. A lot of people taking the encouragement of Sally's call out of innovative practices and people experimenting in a positive way, this sort of silver lining of the resilience and agility that the pandemic's shown. What have been some of your favourite examples of innovation in your sector during lockdown? What have you seen people doing creatively that's really encouraged or inspired you, Matt?
Well, just following on from what the other Matt was saying, I think that was another real key purpose of Vax the Nation campaign, was really to get people open to hearing the facts, because there is a lot of pushing of misinformation and trying to really harness those key aspects, entertainment part of life that people miss so much, to really show, well, you need to listen to this properly if you want to get back to doing this as well. In terms of there's been a lot of innovative initiatives throughout the music and arts industry during the pandemic, whether it be pivoting to still, for artists to still receive exposure and to earn money. But I think the arts industry has really stood out, whether it be Vax the Nation campaign or even some of the other campaigns I've seen. There's been some amazing advertising campaigns put together by different parts of the arts industry to really push the importance of this message. And I think, just again, touching on what Matt said, I think it's important for my industry to use our power to push the right information and try allow people to be more open to hearing that information. And we touch back on what Duncan was saying before with the policies that have been put in place across the university. That's very much front of discussion within the music industry and hospitality venues and everything at the moment. And it's not an easy conversation. While most people are very, very comfortable with it, there's artists, I definitely won't name any, but there's artists that are struggling to come to terms with the need that they need to be told by the government that they have to get vaccinated in order to perform their art moving forward. So there's gonna be a lot of challenges still ahead, I think, with various sectors of the community for them to understand the importance of protecting themselves first and foremost, but obviously importantly protecting others.
Now, we've had an action-packed conversation that is sadly drawing to a close in terms of time, and we've covered a lot of territory in it. And so I'd love to turn to each of you just quickly for a closing thought, speaking to all the Victorians that are listening as leaders in the community, in the role that every person plays in our community response, as a person of trust, as someone who can do the right thing to help us build back better, whether you're aged 10 or aged 100 and everything in between. Matt, I might come to you first, just a closing takeaway or a suggestion or request to those listening.
I guess rather than I think a lot of this pandemic has been people talking on the level of, providing facts, providing information. We've all become armchair epidemiologists. Like, we've learnt a lot, but we're also exhausted. All of us are exhausted. I know you're so tired, and we know that good decision-making, effective decision-making, careful decision-making is harder when you're tired. So I just want to validate that. Like, it's hard to make good decisions. It's hard to stay in the fight when things are really difficult. And it's really easy to listen to the person who's telling you exactly what you want to hear. And sometimes that's a Facebook post or something on social media. And sometimes that's a politician telling you that there are individuals who you should be blaming for the situation that you're in. And I just want you to know that when there's someone who seems to be validating those experiences that you're having, those experiences of anger and frustration and negativity, it's a really good time to go for a walk as much as you can. It's a good time to step away from a screen and just know that that person might be tapping into something that isn't true, but that you're particularly vulnerable to at that moment. And we all are at the moment.
Definitely. Duncan, any quick closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think I would just hope that people can really genuinely learn to live with this virus. This is only one of many different diseases that we can all catch, and one of them is going to get us all in the end. I don't want to be miserable, but that's true. So at some point, we've got to genuinely start living with the virus, and that will mean stopping testing for it. It will mean accepting a certain level of disease from this virus in the community. When we get to that point, I think we will genuinely have come out of the pandemic. While we still have daily scorecards for numbers of cases and all the rest of it, we will still be in the pandemic mindset. So the sooner we can get to that position, I think the better. And getting borders open is incredibly important, if simply because I need to get back to the UK to see my children, who I haven't seen in 2 years. And I know I'm in many others in that same situation, but it is a serious problem. I know that was slightly facetious and silly to say that, but there are a lot of people who I know share that kind of view and share that.
I was just thinking, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are nodding their heads in agreement with you. Matt Gudinski, how about you? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think a big challenge that has really come about for my industry again through the pandemic is the divide between the leaders of our nation, and I think a big, if anything, can come out of this for life moving forward. It's, I think, some more allegiance and alliance and togetherness when the world does face something like this again, because I think if there was a greater alliance between everyone, that we would hopefully be a lot closer, or maybe already be out of this situation by now, or as Duncan has said, worked out a way to live with COVID as we need to. So I think for generally, and also with my industry hat on, I think that's something that I really hope can come from this, and everyone can learn to across the board communicate and work together through horrible situations better.
Definitely. I love that spirit of togetherness focus that you gave us there. Sally, closing thoughts from you?
Too, I love that. And I know Matt Beard mentioned earlier that this is a time that's been quite divisive, but I've actually reflected so often on how unified the community has been at key times. And some of that fracturing has happened more recently because, let's face it, we are the city with the most lockdown days of any other in the world, and that fatigue is definitely setting in. But last Wednesday, when there were 400 rioters at the Shrine, there were 92,500 people that got vaccinated across Victoria that day. And I think that sense of unity across the majority of our community has definitely been something other mayors from around the world have really commented and reflected back to me. But look, to pick up on that theme, I've really noticed a big lift in intensity around everything more recently. I know what Duncan means when people write to you, and I certainly don't take any of that personally at the moment anyway, because of that intensity and the passion that's really driving so much of this debate. But it reminds me that a key feature of this pandemic is that so much has been out of our control. The pandemic has really taken away so many of the levers that we normally use daily to make decisions about our own lives, about our businesses, about our careers, about just our recreational activities even. And it's really hard in those situations to feel joyful or to feel that you've got things under control and within management. And so as we go forward, I think just really acknowledging that this has been a time where we've had to adjust our expectations on what we can control, but really focus on where can we make a difference. And if we all focus our efforts on where we can personally make a big difference, I think that will be a major driver of how we recover well from this pandemic.
I love that encouragement, not only to focus on the sense of unity, the overwhelming sense of unity that so many people are demonstrating, but also that focus on what's the difference that each and every one of us can make and how do we put our energy there. I want all of you watching to join with me in thanking our wonderful panelists, Matt Gudinski, Matt Beard, Duncan Maskell, Sally Capp. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. I know I've taken a lot away. Some of my favorite kind of notes from the conversation were that inaction is a decision in itself. Chrysotunity, our quote of Homer Simpson, the focus around experimentation and innovation, and there's some silver lining to everything that we've been through in terms of new capability we've built, and sense of allegiances that have come to the fore and collaboration that we may not have seen previously. That encouragement or that challenge from Matt Beard to think about how do we engage with people who we disagree with, and that spirit of togetherness and how we bring that forward in the way that we emerge, making sure that we take everyone with us on the journey. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us, for watching. It's been a pleasure to be with you. We hope to welcome you back to Museums Victoria very, very soon. Thanks, everyone.
I hope you enjoyed this insightful and thought-provoking discussion. And we really look forward to welcoming you to the museums again very soon. Thank you.